Fencing to me is one of those home services and commercial services that has the potential to be so strong, so highly fragmented, lack of professionalization.
Like first glance, this is like the unicorn, right? When you hear what people are looking for, it's this. It's a good company that typically is fairly easy to wrap your arms around.
Oh, so Acquisitions Anonymous.
Hello, another episode of Acquisitions Anonymous.
We don't have 100% beard anymore.
And thumbs down on just the plus inventory alone.
Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Acquisitions Anonymous. I'm Mills Snell, one of your co-hosts. I'm joined today by Chelsea from Acquisition Lab, who is a repeat guest, and she brings a great perspective to this episode. We talk about a company. I don't think we've ever talked about a fencing company before, but we talk about a really great size, a little over 5 million in revenue, $1.25 million in cash flow, fencing business in Albuquerque. We talk about the residential commercial mix, the different types of fencing that a company like this provides. Where is their value? It's a very reasonable purchase price. We talk about why this deal probably fell through in the first place. Chelsea brings a great perspective on a bunch of different fronts. This is a great business, I think. And now I want to find a fencing company that is like this in my market, because this is all the way across the country. But if you've looked at home services, if you looked at residential services, or anything, kind of in this sector, I think this is one of those kind of missed opportunities. I hear a lot of people talk about other trades, but this is not one that I hear more commonly. So stick around for the episode after a quick word from our sponsor.
Are you ready to take the leap into business ownership, but you don't know where to start? Well, look no further than Acquisition Lab, the premier resource for entrepreneurs seeking to buy their dream business. Founded by Harvard MBA and acquisition expert Walker Deibel, the lab is your fast track to success in the search, diligence, and acquisition process. With hands-on support, world-class resources, and a community of like-minded entrepreneurs, Acquisition Lab gives you the tools and confidence to navigate every step of the journey. And we're proud to call Walker and Chelsea, the lab's director, longtime friends of the podcast. They're passionate about helping entrepreneurs like you take the next big step. So don't wait to make your business ownership dream a reality. Visit acquisitionlab.com today to learn more and schedule your free consultation. And when you do, be sure to tell them the Acquisitions Anonymous podcast sent you.
Chelsea, how are you?
I am well. How are you?
Doing great. So to set the stage, I just told Chelsea right before hitting record that I have a deal I'm really excited about. I don't know if we've ever talked about one of these businesses before, but it's been way too long for us to have gone this far without. Chelsea, have you ever looked at fencing businesses?
Yes.
Yes, I knew it. I knew you would have coverage on this.
I was really waiting for you to be like underwater basket weaving.
Yeah. It's a massage parlor that's really shady. Yeah.
It's like waiting. I was like, what are we going for?
We did talk about
fencing, not like, yeah.
No, yeah. Like the fence that is around your house or around your business.
Yeah, I got that one covered.
We did talk about a bingo hall the other day that I was pretty excited about. And we also had never talked about one of those. So
I love that.
I think fencing to me is one of those home services and commercial services that has the potential to be so strong. It's so highly fragmented, lack of professionalization. Everybody talks about plumbing and HVAC. And then I think like a tier or two below that is, outdoor services, especially fencing. So I'm going to share my screen. One thing this is maybe just anecdotal, is I thought it was actually kind of hard to find a fencing business to talk about, which is probably a good sign or maybe a bad sign. But I'm going to read this one, and I've got it pulled up on the screen for folks on YouTube. This is on Biz by Sell. It's in Albuquerque, New Mexico. It's a highly reputable and profitable fence and gate company. It says sale pending on Biz by Sell. The asking price is $3.7 million. Cash flow is $1,253,000. They say that their top line revenue is $5.24 million. They have $150,000 in inventory. They don't list EBITDA specifically, but they do say cash flow. Rent is $5,300 a month. The FF&E, furniture, fixture, and equipment, is about $500,000, they say. And the business has been around since 1985. Kind of nice, over 35-year-old business. 2024 numbers are up in all caps, exclamation point, in this description. LOI fell through due to buyer qualifications. Hurry, will go quickly. That's in all caps if you're not following along. This business has been in operation since 1985 and comes with a long list of repeat clients, including state and local municipal agencies. They provide installation and rental of different types of fences, including wood, chain link, commercial fencing, wrought iron, pool fencing, white PVC fencing, ornamental fencing, aluminum or steel, temporary construction panels for lease, and automatic gates with control systems. This business serves Bernalillo County area. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. Sorry to Albuquerque people. The real estate is for lease, but can be purchased as a package deal with the fence business. Business has grown considerably over the last 7 years. They work out of a 1 acre, 5,000 square foot office, approximately 2,000 square feet, and warehouse welding shop, approximately 3,000 square feet, to better service customer needs. The operation's earnings consistently see growth every year, and 2024 has a 30% increase in gross sales and cash flow. The seller expects a continued increase in both revenue and earnings. Most of the company's business comes from word of mouth, repeat customers, no marketing effort currently done. Growth opportunities abound with additional marketing and expansion into Santa Fe, Las Cruces, and Northwest New Mexico markets. It says the inventory is included in the asking price. The lease expires February 25th of 2028. So you got about 3 years left on the existing lease, but they do say that the seller owns the real estate, or at least it's insinuated that way. So you could probably negotiate something on the lease. 17 employees. They give some more description about their building, which I don't think is super relevant right now. Competition: business stands as a turnkey operation backed by an experienced team, reliable suppliers, and a solid sales foundation. Proven track record of success. It has emerged as one of the premier fence contractors in the region. Let's see, growth. They've kind of talked about most of this. And the reason for selling is that the owner wants to retire. It's listed by a guy named Damian Maruca from Business Broker Development Group. I've never actually seen a sponsoring broker either on Biz by Sell.
That's weird. I've never seen sponsoring broker before.
Toby Barker. So yeah, what do you think about this, Chelsea?
I think upon first glance, this is like the unicorn, right? When you hear what people are looking for, it's this. And I find it sad. Again, my assumptions being, asserted as the truth here, that what likely happened here, right, because it is the unicorn, it's what everybody's looking for, is somebody went and snatched it under LOI without having their ducks in a row, which is just causes the entire market to get exhausted, right? And it's not in anyone's best interest, so please stop doing that if you're doing that. And so it's a great business, right? I interviewed a woman that acquired a fencing company, and it wasn't quite this style, right? It was traditional house fencing, right? Which I do think they do a little bit of. It's just how do I say it? It's a good company that typically is fairly easy to wrap your arms around, right? Yeah. And it's not, I feel like people inherently think about landscaping companies as please God forgive me. I don't mean to sound insulting to any, I love my landscapers, right? But they feel like it's almost like a business light, right? Like it's something easy to kind of get their arms around. It's not overly technical, which I beg to differ, but that's a whole nother conversation. And so fencing, right, is another one of those areas that you never really hear people talk about. To your point, I almost feel like pest control is very similar, right? Where it's like there's certain businesses that they're not, you don't have to have the technical know-how. Like landscaping, you do actually need to know how, especially hardscaping, right? Know how to do it in the event that things go sideways. But this is the selling and manufacturing. Clarify that for me.
I don't think so. So I don't think if there's any manufacturing, they mentioned having a welding shop.
Correct.
So it may be that they're like fabricating, metal brackets or, sections of metal fencing. They do have a picture of a metal fence. Looks like a very commercial or municipal setting,
and they use
like maybe
the term
in a college.
Commercial and electric. And so It looked like it had, again, I'd have to go back and read through it myself just to make sure I understood it all because it was a lot. But it looked like it had a pretty good mix. I would obviously want to know how much is of any residential construction is tied to new residential, right? Because we know certain markets that's booming in, and I don't know if Albuquerque is one of them. Not to, I don't often hear Albuquerque as being the next, big booming market. Ironically, my dad was born in Albuquerque, so it's a great place to birth my family line. Apparently, I think that the things to think about, though, with this listing, I mean, this listing is so perfectly unicorn because if you remember down at the bottom, it's like they've never done sales. It's a referral-based business only. It's like every seller or every buyer I talk to, right, is looking for this type of business.
Yeah.
And the best buyers are the ones that have done sales. Like I just hung up with an applicant for the lab and he has a sales background. And being able to do sales is one thing, which is important, but I think it carries a different weight than somebody that's able to build sales teams, right? And so the conversations that I typically have with folks that have that sales background is, I think it's really important to understand your unique flavor of sales to ensure that your sales background is appropriate for the type of sales required for that business, right? And so if you have the type of sales background that's going to be right for this business and you've built sales teams, this is going to do really well. It's got all of the important like characteristics, right, of a buy then build business, right?
Yeah, and I'm thinking at $5 million in revenue, kind of top line. They said the business grew 30% year over year last year. So you're talking about a business that has been very small for almost 40 years, and if you have, to your point, if you have enterprise sales or SaaS sales experience or building teams around enterprise sales, that is totally irrelevant in a lot of ways to this, right? This is, door to door, Facebook ads, Instagram ads, like local billboards. I mean, this is a totally different thing. But if you care about it, I think there is potential low hanging fruit.
I just really like these businesses because they are eternally profitable in the sense of like, you're always going to need fencing, right? And I feel like there needs to be a little bit of a flex between residential and commercial because it does become more discretionary. And regardless of where you stand on the political spectrum, we are in an uncertain time. So like when times are like this, I feel like consumer behaviors tend to get a little bit less predictable. And so if you can lean a little bit more on commercial accounts, that's helpful. I have to be honest, though, a lot of the fencing listings I see, and I don't know if they did this on purpose, appear to be much more residential. Like you're talking like either they'll specialize in vinyl or you'll have one that's like an ornamental fencing company where they specialize in more high end. And so I don't often see the ones that can do motorized fencing, which I think is a whole different, right? Because then you're talking about neighborhoods, right? Like high end neighborhoods, resident or agriculture, commercial, and high net worth, like right where they're going to have their own gated property. Yeah. So it's a different market, and I really like that about this listing.
I phoned a friend as I was walking into my office, Mike Botkin. Do you know Mike? So Mike, I'm giving him a shout out. He rolled up a handful of landscaping businesses, I think 5 or 6 of them in Florida, and exited in like a relatively short amount of time, I think 18 to 24 months. And then is now on the prowl again. He's doing things that are related to like water, like wells, landscaping, but he's got a great knack for residential services, especially outdoor residential services. And I thought, I misremember, but I thought he had a fence company under LOI, and he was like, I don't, but I wish I did. But as we were talking about it for a minute, I mean, there's so many, it's like anything, you double click on it and go, okay, there's a lot to whatever it is. Like there's kind of a whole universe that you could explore with it. But the residential commercial mix is a big one. I work in commercial construction. I own a commercial construction company, and I hear a lot of GCs complain about not having a great fencing contractor. I think because it seems like even in a pretty like well-defined geographic area, it's a smaller total addressable market. You're never going to be, in one state, $100 million fencing company or a $200 million fencing company. I just don't think they get that large, per se. And so I think people kind of schlub it off and go, oh, I want to do something that could be a lot bigger, a lot faster. But I've heard numerous homeowners, numerous, home builders, and numerous commercial GCs complain about, it's just leaves something to be desired. And you have this range, like you said, from just very simple wood fencing that you can buy, like very generic, all the way up to, you got chain link fencing, which is also kind of generic. You've got vinyl, you've got, more ornate wood, you've got more ornate metal, you've got brick. Like there's all kinds of room in the spectrum for what you're doing. And then if you are layering on the really high touch, high dollar things like calibrating somebody's gate to be motion sensor activated, now you've got electronics, now you've got, specialty controls,
and maintenance.
You've got, oh, totally. Yes. Cause those things are so finicky. They break all the time. I have a friend who owns a large commercial GC, and they put a really nice brick column and metal panel fence around the Veterans Hospital here in Columbia. And it's on a main thoroughfare, and it's a huge fence. I mean, it's like, I think it's over a mile long all the way around the thing. And it's like the best recurring revenue source for them because they installed the fence, but it's on a main road and it gets hit like once a month, and they keep having to go back out and, repair the column, put a new metal piece in. Like it's going to be the best like bond forever. They're going to just continue to print money.
I think it's interesting that you point out. So one thing to think about is so I was just talking to somebody maybe with, I don't know, an applicant yesterday, maybe that had a strategic partnership background. Like this would actually be really interesting because there's a lot of potential partnerships. So another space that's using this kind of mechanism is self-storage, like those that are automating self-storage facilities, because gated, right, with button access allows it to be, I mean, a lot of these facilities now are not manned at all, right? It's all offsite. And so there's certain niches that you could then develop that B2B relationship with that would also, I think, make this very interesting. One piece that I want to circle back to that we haven't talked about yet is that real estate piece. And so I find, at least most of the time in the lab, the real estate kind of unravels the economics of doing this, but sometimes it can work really, really beautifully, right? In really strengthening the cash flow by extending the loan. And so it'd be interesting to see what the value is of the real estate and whether or not it would be in the best interest of this deal to include it or not. Because the one thing to be aware of is it says the rent's $5,300. And so I would just want to make sure, because one thing I've seen a lot in lab deals is where the property is owned, and then when they do the add back kind of to course correct for rent, it's like it eats away most of the earnings. And so you'd want to be very careful. And this is super outside of my area of expertise, but I have a speaker coming in to talk to the lab about sell lease back, something like that.
Sale lease back.
And so that goes outside of my area of expertise, but it's like there's a lot possible in that regard when you do want to buy the real estate. And so is that a possibility here? I think this deal has a lot of potential. I think if I was going to buy a company tomorrow, if the lab suddenly started running itself and I didn't have to do all the things I do, fencing is one area that I've often thought of and spoken to my husband about, because I just find it's one of those spaces that I feel like legitimately, maybe it's because I was raised by a carpenter, but it just feels like something that is pretty easy for the whole family, my kids to understand, my husband to understand. Not that my husband would struggle. He's a chemist, so by God, he should understand most things. But I don't know. I really like fencing, and I also really like garage door repair personally.
3 years ago, Kelsey and I decided that we wanted to launch a conference. It was in a space that nobody else was talking about yet, Holdcos.
I only attended 3 live events last year and only one big conference, and that was Holdco Conference.
We ran 2 amazing events in Cleveland, one in 22 and one in 23. And after the event in 2023, we decided that we really had to take it up to the next level. We took a little bit of a break. We started looking for how could we turn this conference into something that a decade from now, we can be proud that we launched it.
Someone and some team needed to step up, and we're doing that. I'm partnering with Kelsey and John to host Holdco Conference in 2025.
We're so excited to partner with Gurley and his team for Holdco Conf 2025.
If you're somebody who runs a Holdco, wants to run a Holdco in the future, isn't our buddy named Matt Paulson who hates Holdcos because he has problems, and you want to learn how to manage multiple businesses at once, want to learn how to incubate companies, that's my joy. I love doing it. I'm excited to talk about it. And you want to connect with other people that are building portfolios of companies as a Holdco practitioner, then this is for you.
The big news is it gets to be a ski conference plus Holdco Conf. So this conference is for folks that are building a Holdco as their main strategy. So you're going to be incubating businesses, you're going to be buying businesses, and you're going to be growing through Holdcos.
You should come to Utah next spring. We're not doing this like other conferences because frankly, I hate those other conferences. This is much more of a sense of camaraderie and very little of the let's get drunk and have a cocktail party and pretend it's progress type conferences that a lot of things are. So space is limited. Get your tickets now, and we'd love to see you. It's going to be very small, very intimate, and filled with great people.
Check out holdcoconference.com for more deets.
I think there's been a lot of consolidation. You mentioned pest control before, even in garage door. I think there's been a lot. I think this has kind of not been picked over as much.
Agreed.
I have a friend who is in the foundation repair business, and they own a very, very large business in the Midwest, and they were kind of branching out into other, residential and home services, and they kept looking at fencing and didn't end up going that route. They did something more garage focused, and they just have absolutely been kicking themselves. They said that a year in, 18 months in, fencing became like one of the number one. There's a lot of big fencing franchise concepts that kind of help package and make this kind of turnkey. Whenever you're talking to people, Chelsea, because you talk to a lot of folks who are repeat buyers or first-time buyers, if they're looking at something like this versus a franchise, how do you help them make that delineation between what would be the right fit for them?
What I'm about to say represents Chelsea's opinion and no one else's. It's not the official standpoint of anyone. So I think franchises are great for certain people and not great for others, right? And so when we're talking to lab members or applicants to the lab, it's really about figuring out what your pain points are and making sure that you're buying a company that addresses your pain points appropriately, right? So if you've never done operations, or if you are someone, if you've never done sales is a great example, right? Lead gen is not something you want to deal with. Franchises are great for that, right? Most franchise models will feed you the leads and you don't have to worry about that. If you are a creative person who wants creative control, a franchise is going to make you want to do bad things to yourself.
Yeah, you're stifled.
Correct. You have no authority over the marketing side, right? And so I think that for folks that aren't that familiar with operations can take comfort in franchising, because franchising separates it a little bit, right? You have that top tier support. It's kind of like business ownership with training wheels, I think. But you just have to make sure that you're not jeopardizing your returns based on insecurity, right? Really be true to who you are and where your skills lie, because there's a lot that comes with franchises that you have to be very mindful about, right? Especially a franchisor agreement. Make sure that a lot of franchise agreements are entirely one-sided and can put you in a position of risk without realizing it. And so I think it's great for some people and not good for others. And then my universal statement is don't buy new franchises. That is silly. It is a startup. And so if you are going to go the franchise route, you want to buy one that is established and cash flowing for the same kind of criteria that we use for businesses. Otherwise, you're literally just gambling. Yeah.
If you're in the first 5, 10, 15, 20, franchisees, they're still learning.
Correct.
Once they have, 350 franchisees, it's probably already largely been picked over. I have a belief that there's kind of a great sweet spot where, if there's a benefit of getting in early, but you could also get in early to a thing that's not very good, and then you want to get out.
And especially franchises don't have product market fit, right? And so when you buy a new territory, that hasn't proven successful in your territory yet. So this whole idea of buying over that hump, right? Avoiding a startup so you can buy over that hump, that has not been overcome yet, right? You are just basically like bypassing the infrastructure stage, maybe, right? Assuming that the franchisor has actually gotten their act together and can provide that infrastructure. But there's nothing to say that you're going to be able to execute that new franchise in your territory, right? And that's why buying one that's already exists is so beneficial, right? It's proven, it works. There's customers, right?
The other thing about this that I think is really worth talking about is the labor piece of fencing. So, in the hierarchy of kind of in-house versus sub labor and skilled versus semi-skilled versus unskilled labor, I think this sits in a really nice spot.
Agreed.
There's not the perceived complexity, like roofing. There's not a lot of people who are like, I'm going to roof my own house, and kudos to them if they do. I think that's very ballsy. But there's a lot of people who are like, I might build my own fence. Like that's a common DIY project. But I think what you find is that, if it's just a small fence, people are, more likely to go, I just need to do it from like the side of my house to the side of my lot. But when you talk about, running 200 feet plus of fence, all of a sudden this goes from a weekend warrior project to a totally different kind of level. And it's not that technically complicated. They're probably renting an auger, even in the early days, right? You can rent an auger to go dig your post holes so you don't have to dig them by hand. You're setting 4x4 posts in concrete, and you're coming back and doing not even trim level carpentry work. It's just basic framing of mostly wood members. Now, like we said, the complexity goes up from there. If you're doing masonry, if you're doing steel, if you're doing aluminum, like it gets way more complicated. But you could build I think in most markets, most decent sized markets, you could build a business this size doing predominantly wood and kind of simple metal fencing. The labor associated with that, I think, is, probably largely subcontracted. They have 17 employees, so I don't think they fit in this category. I'm not sure. They don't tell us the dispersion of their staff across sales, project management, shop, fabrication, all those things. But this could be a largely subcontracted business, unlike maybe like manufacturing, right? Or professional services where it's pretty much going to be in-house labor.
I think the caveat to that, which is a challenge with all of these home service-based businesses that are contracted based, is consistency, right? Quality and consistency. And you have to make sure that, and this company's been around a long time, and so they've got that going for them, but that your contractors are as good as your brand.
Yeah.
Right. Because I do think that's where a lot of companies will go wrong. Like you can go to Home Depot and order a fence, right? And they'll do all the installation of everything you can imagine. There is a vast array of the skills that you're going to get. And so I think to differentiate yourself, you have to be very mindful about how you vet contractors, right? And that you're very quick to move past contractors that are problematic in any way.
Yeah.
And so I think that's something that all buyers listening to this need to be mindful of, is like when you're buying, and so many of these businesses, these small businesses are contractor based, right? Regardless of if it's service or anything, right? It's like a cost control mechanism, is that you have some method in place to manage the control, right? And the quality of the contractors you're using, because it can tank your business really fast if you're not picking the right contractors to work with.
Before we wrap up, let's talk about valuation and purchase price on this. It's roughly 3 times multiple. And for over $1 million, let's just say the earnings are real, I mean, that catches a lot of people's eye, and that moves it probably pretty high in the list. You had said something. Let's talk about valuation first, and then I want to follow up on something you said early on. What are your thoughts on valuation on this?
Spot on. Awesome. My guess is it'll go higher, right?
Yep.
The thing that I love about this lovely broker is that if this is real, they priced it appropriately, knowing that you will actually get, Chelsea's opinion again, I think you will often get more for your seller if you price reasonably than if you go to market with a high price that no one wants to understand, right?
Yeah.
They're just going to come back and push back as to why you're asking for an astronomical amount. I have seen that tank more deals in the last 3 months in the lab. Just that unreasonable space that our buyers get put into between a broker and unrealistic expectations on asking price. This is awesome, right? Like I can easily see a lab member, depending on obviously getting the actual confidential information memorandum and all those supporting documents, offering more, right? Than what they're asking. And so it's actually in the broker or in the seller's best interest to do it this way, assuming again that the numbers are being presented to us are true.
Yeah. Yeah. You had mentioned earlier the kind of phenomenon of the buyer falling through. Mm-hmm. And I've seen it a bunch of times. I know you see it and live it day to day, but I think it manifests itself in a few ways. You've got buyers who, probably offer too much. They put the business under LOI for something that is not reasonable. And the way that manifests itself in my experience is they can't put together equity and they can't put together debt.
Correct.
And, the market is telling them, hey, good job getting a business under LOI because you don't have anything until you have that. But you've mispriced yourself out of the equity making sense. And then also probably the debt service.
Correct.
Won't underwrite.
Correct. And I think I'll have members come in and join the lab with a debt or with a deal in hand, which is fine. Like we support people post-close all the way, pre-close, whatever you want to do, right? 99% of the time, I swear, what they've offered isn't reasonable. Number one, it's not actually allowed, right? They're not familiar with the requirements of the SBA. Number two, to your point, the debt service, I understand what they're trying to achieve. And I'm like, you're never going to be able to pay yourself what you're trying to pay yourself with this debt service and with the growth plans you've outlined. Like they're going to cost more than you're allocating there. I am thoroughly convinced, again, Chelsea's opinions only, that everybody out there on podcasts telling people buy as big as you can, that's only because they didn't buy big enough to support their goals. And so they're telling everyone you need to go buy as big as you can because they didn't think about how much they needed to plan for growth, right, to fund their growth. And they either had to sacrifice growth initially or their own pay. And so this is why our acceptance rate is so low and why I still run all the strategy calls for the lab is because I want to make sure that someone coming into the lab knows how big of a company they actually have to buy to be able to afford all these things so that they don't go and put in LOIs on companies that they have no means putting in, right?
Yeah.
The market is exhausted. And it's like anything we can do to help, but always plan for growth. Always, guys. Always plan for growth. I think that's the one thing that doesn't get planned for. And for a little bit of cushion, working capital burns way faster than you think.
Yeah.
And so making sure that you're not draining all of earnings is just best practice, right?
Yeah. This was a good one, Chelsea. I appreciate you joining us to talk about it. Where can people find you and Acquisition Lab?
So you can find out about Acquisition Lab on our website, acquisitionlab.com. You can find me on LinkedIn. I have a Twitter handle. I never go on Twitter. I think I'm SMB Chelsea Wood. You can find me on LinkedIn as well under Chelsea Lynn Wood. Well,
thanks everybody for sticking around and listening to this episode. I was super excited about it. It didn't disappoint. I now am going to be thinking about fencing for the next week or so. As I drive home, I'm going to be looking at okay, how many of these houses have fences? How many need them? What's the composition?
Part of being in this space now is I drive around and every business is I'm I wonder what their net income is. I wonder what their operating margins are. I love business. I'm a nerd.
Agreed. Well, thanks everybody. We'll see you next time.